Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. This is part 2 of the Ukraine news update for the 22nd of July 2023. It won't be as long as the first one, although there's so much geopolitical news that has been over the last few days. It's just, a lot to get through, but not a lot of frontline news. Just last 3 days, it's been really scarce. Relying quite a bit on the ISW here for some kind of claims. Like, so we go to the northeast, Kupiansk-Svatva to Crimea line. Ukrainian forces continued ground attacks and did not advance. But Russian forces continued offensives in the Kupiansk area and reportedly advanced themselves. So the Russians have advanced, perhaps, as at least according to the Russians. Russian forces continued offensive operations in the Crimea area and reportedly made marginal advances again yesterday. So the Russians perhaps having some joy in that northeastern sector, and that is a problem for the Ukrainians going forward. What do? Do they commit their counteroffensive forces to defending that sector or leave it to existing forces? That's still the kind of dilemma. Then when we come down to the Bakhmut area, a few sources here saying small evening update. Finally, it says Bakhmut north flank. The Ukrainians continue to press the Russians in the salient northwest of Bakhivka. After using cluster munitions, the Ukrainians take over Russian positions near Yahidny, so north of Bakhmut, potentially some joy for them there. Klishchivka, Andriivka, Kurdimivka goes on to say the Ukrainians, especially the 30th Mechanized, is making progress in these directions too. Cluster munitions have been used. Russian positions have been taken over and prisoners and loot have been taken. That is from that source. No report says the Ukrainians, and this is last night, are conducting offensive operations towards Klishchivka and Andriivka right now. Tomorrow there will probably be good news. Now, Michael McKay here. This is an important point. He says the Russians shelled 15 settlements in this front, including Rozdilivka, Klishchivka, Stupochki, Konstantinivka, so on and so forth. Now, if the Russians are shelling Klishchivka, then that significantly means Ukrainian forces are in that settlement. And then another source saying the armed forces of Ukraine in the southwestern outskirts of Bakhmut strengthened their positions. The Ukrainian sources report the presence of the Ukrainian army in the village of Klishchivka. ISW reported 1.8 kilometer Ukrainian army advance on Bakhmut's southern flank. At Klishchivka, the enemy went on the defensive. Positional battles continue. North of Klishchivka, the armed forces of Ukraine have had partial success in continuing to knock out the Russians from the forest plantations. West and southwest of the village, the armed forces of Ukraine have had partial success in the area of the forests as well, where the Russians are counterattacking. In the south, almost all landings are under control of the Ukrainians. The battles continue in the direction of the village of Andriivka and the village of Kurdimivka. So I don't know what it means about landings, whether that is across the canal. Not too sure there. So again, Bakhmut seems to be the area of most joy for the Ukrainians. Going to the southern front line, Russian sources are reporting tonight, that was obviously yesterday, that after a large artillery barrage, Ukrainian armor and mechanized elements equipped with NATO equipment have launched a major assault on the Russian defensive lines in the Zaporizhia region between Robotna and Verbova, which is manned by forces from the 291st and 70th Motorized Rifle Regiments, respectively. So there is quite a bit of activity, but not a lot of information coming out. Southern update from the ISW. Ukrainian forces continue counteroffensive operations around the Velika Novosilka area. Geolocated footage published yesterday indicates Ukrainian forces have advanced near Pryutne. So if you remember where that is, just on if we look at the image here, you've got Velika Novosilka, you've got all those settlements down to Staromyorska. There's lots of rumors about Staromyorska. There were claims that the Ukrainians pulled out of Staromyorska and then hit it with cluster munitions. The whole range of claims to the Russians beating them out, to them doing well there, and everywhere in between. Just trying to work out what the actual truth is. But yeah, possible advances near Pryutne. And then it goes on to say Ukrainian forces continue counteroffensive operations in western Zaporizhia Oblast. So that's more along the lines to past Robotna and then to Piatichetki and Kamyanska. So they say there are no confirmed gains in the area. So it's just really difficult, I think, for the Ukrainians. Um, Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces maintain a presence on the left bank of Kherson Oblast, so left bank of the Dnipro River, and that fighting continues near the Antonivsky Bridge. Again, not a huge amount of change there by the sounds of it. But again, information is pretty short at the moment. There's not too much coming out. Now, obviously, you've got operational security, but also perhaps quite a lot of stability there, bit of stasis, becoming positional. The Ukrainians, as I said, they might well just be sitting back far more and letting their artillery do the work. Because otherwise it's kind of fairly suicidal to just throw your forces in and expect to take ground when there are so many mines everywhere. And then as you're slowly negotiating the mines, Russians are hitting you with artillery. So you've got to take out all the artillery. Right, moving on to military aid now. This is really significant. Quite a big interview here. John Kirby on Fox News saying the US may transfer F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine already this year. So now we're seeing a real ramping up. I don't know whether the Americans are going to be thinking, right, okay, bit of a problem going on the front line, as in there's a total change of tactics. The Russians have a good defensive setup that is proving too difficult to overcome without changing things up considerably. So we need to do something to change that. And one of the things, one of the claims is ATACMS and air defense systems, as we'll go on to see, but also F-16 fighter jets. Now, they're not going to be the panacea. Like, you can't use them effectively, really, without completely clearing out air defense systems. But then you could use these to clear out air defense systems. It's all about the weaponry you put on board these airframes. And what you need to do is wrest back the advantage in terms of range. So you need to knock out the air defenses, and you need to then get the right kit on these airframes to have ranged air-to-air missiles that make them comparable to what the Russians have, and the advantage they presently have over the older Ukrainian airframes, Soviet airframes that are unable to fire as far as the Russian planes are. So anyway, this is really significant. We believe that F-16 alone will not be able to turn the tide, though, and that's the important part. It's not the panacea, but they are super important, right? The US will provide Ukraine with a new $400 million military aid package, several Striker armored personnel carriers, demining equipment, ammunition for NASAMS, anti-aircraft missile systems, HIMARS artillery missile systems, Patriot and Stinger, and anti-tank weapons, particularly TOW and Javelin, will be included in the list. So a lot of what they've already got, just more of them. And Turkey plans to supply Ukraine with 180 Bayraktar TB2 drones, 100 Bayraktar Mini, 500 protective vehicles. Wow. Okay, so that's big. And actually, 180 Bayraktar drones. This is a massive amount. And 122 mil rockets. In addition, deliveries of mortar and artillery ammunition will soon begin, Turkish and Western experts report. That's from one of the pro-Russian accounts. This is like huge. Now, I want to see this reported. I'm going to have a look for this in the mainstream news. But that is absolutely freaking huge, right? And Turkey are. I've just got goosebumps. Like, Turkey are so important potentially, right? What we haven't seen so far is Turkey openly going, right, we're going to support Ukraine with everything. And we've got to a point rhetorically where Putin and the Kremlin have kind of dissed Turkey, because Turkey have allowed accession into NATO of Sweden and Finland. And they are now openly saying Ukraine are kind of the good guys and we're supporting Ukraine, whilst also taking money off Russia. So they are speaking out both sides of their mouth, but it seems like more openly they are in defense of Ukraine. And if they, with their kind of NATO positioning and their military defense and industrial military complex, that is really like it's getting better and better each year. I mean, Turkey are a serious kind of military manufacturer. They can be, and their proximity to Ukraine, they can be a huge supporter. They could really sway things, I think. Uh, and if they are then like rewarded for doing so by Western allies, there's going to be elements of like, yeah, we want to get into the EU, yeah, we want this, yeah, we want that, and US have a lot to do with this, with selling them F-16 airframes and other bits and pieces. But if everyone gets Turkey around and says, yeah, you can, but yeah, give some a Woody, thanks, mate, thanks, Erdogan. If everyone gets around and does that and makes them feel good and gives them rewards for that, honestly, Turkey, I think, could be hugely influential in the outcome of this war with, stuff like this that you see here, 500 MRAPs, those would be Kirpis or similar, 180 Bayraktar TB2s, 100 Bayraktar minis. It's huge. Talking about drones, the UK Defence Ministry, and I've shown you some of the drone footage of this, I think, this exact drone before, where in its design phase or testing phase, UK Defence Ministry showed the UK Malloy drone, which can move equipment, weapons, and even wounded from the front line. The UK will give these drones to Ukraine in an aid package with armoured vehicles. So that's something that's worth looking out for. This is kind of the future, isn't it? Anyway, we talked a lot about drones over time, but when you have an injured person, hit in a trench that no one can really get to, or whatever, if they can roll themselves onto a stretcher, I mean, it does. Or people, no, it's not just about that. It's like, okay, you've got some guys next to them, we've got a stretcher, but actually, getting to a vehicle is like 2K that way, and then getting the vehicle to the hospital and so on and so forth. If you can get a drone to come in, and that means that the two people don't have to be taken out of fighting, they can continue fighting, or four people, depending on how many people usually be walking a stretcher, whack them on a big drone and get that drone back to safety, then that's hugely important. I mean, the issue is how susceptible is a big drone like that to being taken out of the sky by air defense or just by small arms fire. But that's really cool. Right, Rheinmetall. I'm also interested to see what the UK are going to give in terms of armored vehicles as well. Rheinmetall production plant that's been slated for Poland, no, for Ukraine actually. So there are all sorts of different things going on. There are these ones that are going to be built in Poland, and then also ones built in Ukraine. So a plant being opened in Ukraine will be protected by Rheinmetall's own air defense systems, said the company's CEO Armin Papika. It's all a bit like these dystopian movies. I don't know, Terminator or whatever, where you have these defense corporations and then protected by their own like weaponry and stuff, and it's all like ugh. But obviously that'd be super important for Ukraine to be able to have something indigenous within Ukraine, just from a practical geographical point of view, as opposed to anything else. This needs repairing, get it over there, get it fixed, get it back, and that all takes place within the safety of your own, hopefully the safety of your own borders, just practically easier. There are growing concerns that Western support for Ukraine's defense against the Russian invasion is fading, the Washington Post warns. Ukraine fatigue is a real thing. Right, let's dip into this article really quickly. Opinion: the West feels gloomy about Ukraine. Here's why it shouldn't. Actually, this is a pretty interesting article, a pretty decent article, talking about how there is growing fatigue, and you can imagine that is almost certainly the case. But the author says the discontent is understandable but wrong. The middle of the conflict always tests people's nerves. It feels like a tunnel. There's a sense of fatigue and frustration. Confidence sags and competence start blaming one another. This war weariness might afflict Ukraine and its allies, but it's vastly more evident in Russia, and that's a really good point. Ukraine might not be winning this war yet, and I'll take you back to my first video earlier, which had those women, wives and mothers of missing soldiers. There's a lot of war weariness going on in Russia, no doubt. So this war weariness might afflict Ukraine and its allies, but it's vastly more evident in Russia. Ukraine might not be winning this war yet, but Russia is losing. Great line. and its leaders and people know it. Really, yeah, I think that's on point. Putin's army holds its defensive positions in Ukraine, hiding behind a blanket of mines. But the Russian army's command and control is disintegrating. I'll take you back to the Russian mill bloggers. I'll take you back to Prigozhin and the mutiny. I'll take you back to Popov being dismissed and other leaders being dismissed. Surovikin, competent military commanders being dismissed, arrested, moved sideways because they are voicing their concerns or supporting Prigozhin. It is crumbling. There is no doubt about that. It's a mess that Putin seems unable to admit, let alone fix. And again, I think that's on point too. So it goes on to say later, meanwhile, for the US and NATO allies, these 18 months of war have been a strategic windfall at relatively low cost, other than for the Ukrainians. So this is true. Like strategically, if a couple of years ago, like with Putin in the ascendancy and this big strong figure and Russian oil and hydrocarbons so important for the whole world. If a couple of years you say, do you know what? Within 2 years, Putin's going to be pretty much brought to his knees. The Russian economy will be absolutely screwed. Russian soft power will be screwed around the world, and they will have lost most of their armed capabilities. And you can have that for like X billion dollars. The U.S. Army and administration, government administration, would be biting your hand off for that. Like, looking at the whole big picture, and this is kind of what it's saying, it's a strategic win for relatively low cost. The West's most reckless antagonist has been rocked. NATO has grown much stronger with the additions of Sweden and Finland. Germany has weaned itself off the dependence on Russian energy and onto US LPG, LN, liquefied natural gas as well. So, there's a win for the US. Germany has weaned itself from dependence on on Russian energy and in many ways rediscovered its sense of values. NATO squabbles make headlines, but overall this has been a triumphal summer for the alliance. The Ukrainian battlefield is hard to assess from a distance. Reporting from the front lines offers searing evidence that the offensive has been a bloody slog against entrenched Russian forces, but Ukraine continues to advance slowly in the south and much of the east. Kyiv hasn't achieved its goal of splitting the swath of Russian-occupied territory along the coast and putting Russian forces in Crimea at risk, but operations such as Monday's strike on Kerch Strait Bridge show that Russians' hold is vulnerable. How can Ukraine advance further to a position from which it could bargain for a peace deal from strength? Pentagon officials keep reminding me that for all the angst about the slow pace of the offensive, Ukraine still hasn't committed the bulk of its mobile forces. It's watching for weak points in Russian lines where it can punch through. A measure of the difficult battle ahead came Tuesday from General Mark Milley, chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. Quote, I think there's a lot of fighting left to go, and I'll stay with what we said before. This is going to be long. It's going to be hard. It's going to be bloody. Ukrainian commanders say they need two things, and it goes on to say ATACMS and better air defense and protection from Russian air attacks. It's not necessarily about F-16s, but it's about air defense equipment. So there's a worthy read that in the Washington Post. So we're also hearing about this. Officials in the Russian defense, and I mentioned this yesterday, defense industry have reportedly told TASS, so that's Russian state media effectively, that armor forces from the southern military district have recently been provided with a number of T-14 Armata main battle tanks for combat operations in Ukraine, and they have already been used in a limited capacity. These officials stated that the tanks have since been withdrawn from the front line for additional testing. So wow, again, take that with a pinch of salt. Ocean Defender here, but T-14 Armatas has been sent to the front line and then sent back for further testing. In other words, they're falling apart and they're not very good. I mean, we've seen them used at the parade in Moscow, and one of them just stopped working and couldn't even be towed away. It was like handbrake on, just, embarrassing. So on to geopolitical stuff, and I'll attempt to race through this. So Putin has kind of some interesting rhetoric yesterday from Putin. Poland seized part of Lithuania, seized its historical lands from Russia, is taking advantage of the civil war, and it participated in the division of Czechoslovakia, says Putin. Basically, some weird threats to Poland here. So Putin tells Poland any aggression against Belarus is an attack on Russia. So Poland are worried about Wagner being in Belarus and Belarus, being a threat to Poland. I don't think that's realistic at all. because Poland would smash Belarus just very easily. And yeah, so I think that's a situation. You've also got Poland buying, I think, 96 Apaches now, Apache helicopters, they announced yesterday. So yeah, Poland have got a huge number of tanks, HIMARS, stuff from South Korea, stuff from the US, so on and so forth. So I don't think Belarus would stand a chance. But this is Russia knowing that Belarus is a super important ally and standing with them really strongly. But Putin here, he says, right. As for the Polish leaders, quite possibly they are counting on forming some kind of coalition under the NATO umbrella to get directly involved in the Ukrainian conflict in order to tear off a good chunk of Ukraine for themselves, to take back the historic lands as they think of them. Currently, Western Ukraine, it's well known that they dream of Belarusian lands as well. As for Ukrainian regime policy, it's their business that they want to betray their country. And sell some things, as all traitors do, to repay. Owners, that's their business. We won't get involved. But as for Belarus, it's part of the Union state. Aggression against Belarus will mean aggression against the Russian Federation. We will respond to it with all means at our disposal. Crazy project dilution budget, as Natchet agrees. I don't know what it's saying there. It's a bit confusing there. So anyway, point is that he's again going back. He likes to dip into history when it's convenient for him to do so, and he'll go back only so far. It's like Ukraine is part of Russia because of X and Y in this part of history. It's like, well, how about going back a bit further? Why do you stop there, or why do you go back that far? You know, you are cherry picking a point in history that suits you, because before that it ain't going to suit you, and after that it ain't going to suit you. So, and then why do you get to special plead that part of history? And this is kind of what he's doing here. Anyway, yeah, interesting stuff. Polish have said the ambassador of the Russian Federation will be summoned to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They are not happy about this because basically, well, if I read you the beginning here, Moscow. So, President Vladimir Putin on Friday accused NATO member Poland of having territorial ambitions on the former Soviet Union, and said any aggression against Russia's neighbor and close ally Belarus would be considered an attack on Russia. Moscow would react to any aggression against Belarus, which forms a loose union state with Russia, with all the means at our disposal, Putin told the meeting of the Security Council on televised remarks. Warsaw's Security Committee decided on Wednesday to move military units to eastern Poland after members of the Russian Wagner mercenary force arrived in Belarus. The state-run news agency PAP quoted its secretary as saying on Friday, Poland denies any territorial ambitions in Belarus. In his remarks, Putin had also stated that western part of Poland was a gift from Soviet leader Joseph Stalin to the country, and that Russia would remind Poles about it. In apparent reference to that, Polish Prime Minister tweeted on Friday evening that Stalin was a war criminal guilty of the death of hundreds of thousands of Poles. Historical truth is not debatable. So on and so forth. And there's also the claims now that tactical nukes are in Belarus, or at least the US have said there's no reason to think that they aren't. So, you know, things are possibly heating up around here. I think this is just posturing personally, but, you know, it's got to the point where I think like NATO, realistically, NATO and like Poland could defeat on its own, Poland could defeat the Russian army completely on its own now without a problem. Like, Ukraine have held the Russian army for a year and a half and basically degraded it to a point where there's no coming back from there. So it's just, you know, Putin can saber rattle all he likes, but the only thing he's got in his locker are nuclear warheads, and that's it. Okay, Ukraine's ambassador to UK has been dismissed after criticising Zelensky. I think this needs some talking about, really. So he was talking about, it was on Sky News. So he was asked by Sky News if there's a hint of sarcasm in Zelensky's promise that each and every morning we'll wake up and call Ben Wallace to thank him. He answered, I don't think that kind of sarcasm is healthy. We don't have to show the Russians there is something between us. They have to know we are working together. If something happens, Ben can call me and tell me everything he wants. In the same interview, he pointed out that Britain had begged the US to send troops during the Second World War, and in the end they did. But he added, "We are not expecting anyone to fight for us. We are only asking for equipment." So it is. This is a sort. It's a criticism, but it's not a really big criticism. I don't think that kind of sarcasm is healthy. Is basically all he said, and now he's been sacked by Zelensky. So yes, it's really important to make sure you got everything singing on the same song sheet, and presenting a unified Ukraine is super important. But I don't know the wisdom of getting rid of a UK ambassador like that quickly over just that sentence. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be a range of opinions on that one. Russian businessman who had sanctions against him has been lifted. Those sanctions have been lifted by the UK. He says he hopes cowards in Moscow will now be encouraged to speak out against Putin. This is a good use of kind of sanctioning, which is like if you come out really publicly against Putin and against the Kremlin and against Russia, then we'll lift sanctions on you. Great. Yeah. Really, this is Oleg Tinkov, who successfully challenged UK sanctions against him this week, told the Financial Times that Russian oligarchs would be inspired to oppose the war if the West was willing to lift the restrictions. Interesting discussion to be had about this. A mistake was made. Now they've fixed it, Tinkov said in an interview on Friday, but that's good for them because they can show other Russian businessmen who are united around Putin, thanks to sanctions, that you can make a statement and leave Russia for the civilized world. It's started. He looks a bit like Richard Branson, doesn't he, in a sense? So a rare self-made billionaire who starred himself after Richard Branson had secured a statement of support from the Virgin founder for his sanctions challenge. Tinkov has long been an outlier in the Kremlin-dominated Russian business world. Alone among his peers, Tinkov had denounced Putin, Russia's president, for starting a crazy war in Ukraine, rued the country was sinking into fascism, and gave up his Russian citizenship in protest. So, I mean, you don't stand close to any windows yourself, mate, but I think this is good, and I think those are the kind of Russian oligarchs you want to be sort of supporting, if you like, or not sanctioning. I think, yeah, that is good. And the only thing is that no one in Russia is going to be hearing about this. Well, other oligarchs might, but the general public are going to be unaware of such things. And yeah, in Soviet Russia, a country divest from you. They're giving the best to their cronies, and then everything will go to shite. Says Kremlin-friendly oligarchs are eyeing prime Western assets and getting them for next to nothing. Right, what's going on here? So you've got this situation and I've reported recently how Carlsberg and another company had their assets seized, basically, or their operations in Russia taken over by the Kremlin, effectively. And you've got this really difficult situation for those companies, which is good, in Russia. You know, you're trapped in Russia, and everyone else is slagging you off. Think of all the kind of Unilever companies. And so if you stay there, the Western general public will boycott you and give a negative sense of your morality. But you've got that threat of, yeah, we're staying there to make a profit. But then if you stay there, the Russian government might just nationalize your interests anyway. So yeah, I might pop into this FT Financial Times article for an extra a little bit later. Anyway, now's not the time, but thank you very much for watching. That's the second part of my news update today. Please check out the first if you haven't already seen it. Take care of yourselves, Toodle Pips. Speak to you later, if I can actually get my words out. Yeah.